Hello everyone, I hope you can all hear me. This is my third live stream on YouTube. So this evening, I'm just going to adjust my lighting a bit because there we go. So this evening I'm going to talk about self-sabotage, which is a project I think I would have a PhD in if they gave awards for that. Probably wouldn't require a trophy, more a wooden spoon maybe, but anyway. I want to talk about that because all the ways that we can sort of lose our heads and undermine ourselves by rejecting others and ultimately by rejecting ourselves. Disclaimer before I begin, the usual one: any herbs or treatments I talk about in this video are for educational, informational and entertainment purposes only. In other words, that I'm not prescribing to anyone. If you want to get some help for this, then please go and see a qualified herbalist or a psychotherapist or a therapist, and of course do your own research. So hopefully information in this video will be useful, but will not be used as sort of like a direct recommendation, if that makes sense. Anyway, right, I'm just going to start with one example of a kind of fairly benign incident of self-sabotage in my own life. I mean, there are many I could pick from, but one of the earliest ones that I remember, because it really sticks in my mind, is sort of from, I mean, I was maybe 18, 19 years old, going out in a club. It was the first night that I ever indulged in the use of any substances which alter consciousness, let's say, in a significant way. And I remember seeing somebody there I thought was really attractive, and my friend was like, "Oh, they're really attractive, you should go and speak to them." And I did, and I went up and said, "You're gorgeous," to this person, and this person responded with, "So are you." And my response was to laugh in their face and walk away. So kudos to this person. They followed me onto the dance floor and sort of hung around for a good 15 minutes. And I sort of just blanked them. And I was in my head, I was thinking I was wanting them to make a move, but I was giving them no signals of interest at all. And eventually they walked off. And I remember at the end of the night, I saw them walk in, look straight at me, turn around and walk out. And I remember thinking, there they go. And then that night, walking back home, I remember crouching down in the street and putting my hands on my head going, what have I just done? Because this person was the most hands down attractive, in my eyes, person I've ever seen. They were like literally the epitome of everything I found attractive. And I think, I mean, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then. A lot of things have happened. But I think one of the key things about that incident is that very often, for me, and I think for a lot of us, the things that are most frightening, or the things that we sabotage ourselves on, are the things we most desire. And one of the reasons, and I think sometimes these things are invisible to us, you spot their mechanics through what actually happens, through the results. In other words, in this case, it's sort of obvious that my fear of attaining what I wanted was greater than my fear of staying where I was. And if you'd asked me that, I'd have said, no, of course, I really want this thing. Are you mad? What? That's stupid. But the practical action tells you that that is in fact the case, that my fear of getting it, and of course underneath that, the layer underneath that, is because what I was really afraid of was that I was not going to be able to keep this person. I was not good enough for that person. So underneath a lot of the self-sabotage is always the I'm not good enough, or I'm afraid of this being taken away. And that's often rational. Like if you come from a background of, you know, like most people do in different ways, you come from backgrounds of different kinds of small t or large t trauma, you have experiences which, you know, program you to have certain reflexive responses, which may be responses of rejection, of self-protection. But as you get older, those become unhelpful. those become the demons that sabotage you. Those same things which, when you were young, the same responses which protected you from trauma, that evolved sort of to keep you out of trouble, are now preventing you from living. So, all right, there's a couple of, I mean, there's a few things I wanted to just talk about in terms of practical things that have helped me over the years. So when I say that have helped me, I mean, like, I used to take lots and lots of naughty substances, which I was able to stop doing, thankfully, sort of in my early 20s. And then subsequently, and this is like peeling layers off an onion, right? Then after that, I sort of had an eating disorder, which got resolved. And then after that, and this was a huge thing, and I think a lot of people have this problem, but it's not well recognized, I had a big sleep disorder, in the sense that I couldn't stop myself going to bed at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. sometimes, sleeping in late, and getting up at 1 or 2, and being self-employed a lot of the time, I could do that because I could pick my own schedule. But you know, for all the people who say, oh well, you know, if you just got a 9-to-5 job, that wouldn't keep happening. Incorrect. When I was teaching at university for a number of years, and I was still keeping to that schedule, and I would be going into class trying to teach after 1 or 2 hours sleep, and sort of like having micro sleeps in the class. That got resolved. So you know, there aren't now at this stage in my life, I say touch wood, any major self-destructive habits like that left over. But there are still, I mean, there's always more layers to the onion, right? There are still thought patterns that I have, still instinctive reactions that I have that are self-destructive. But here are some of the things that I found that are very helpful and that continue to help me, and hopefully might help some of you. So the first thing is something called, the lady is called Marissa Peer, and she does something called rapid transformational therapy. But I really want to just talk about an interview she did with Lewis Howes called Your Thoughts Can Heal or Kill You. And I've linked that interview in the description in YouTube under the video. And it was really, really good. One of the key things she talked about there, it's super simple, so simple, but so effective, is speak kindly to yourself, particularly when you're annoyed with yourself. And I don't always succeed at that. Sometimes I still get, when I get frustrated, I can, you know, I used to self-harm, and I can literally start to want to attack myself. Less and less as time has gone on. But her, the advice she gives in this interview was really, really good. And I've passed it on to many clients since then, and they've found it helpful in the main too. And that just is to speak kindly to yourself. So what that means is, when you get annoyed, rather than calling yourself an idiot, just say to yourself, you silly Billy, or something like that. And particularly if you've monumentally effed up, it's good to say, you silly Billy. And also just speak kindly to yourself in general. So if you have a very critical inner voice, which I think is often the case for people who have experienced some forms of abandonment or similar kind of, or just let's say any form of childhood emotional trauma, which is a large percentage of the population, you might have a very critical inner voice. Then speaking to yourself kindly can do amazing things over time, because it's about reprogramming those emotional habits. I liken it to this: you can't get rid of the old roads in your brain that have been built, those roads in the limbic system, the emotional motivational system of our brains, which we share with other mammals, and in fact all vertebrates. It's sometimes called the reptile brain for that reason, that this basic motivational system of vertebrates is emotional, interestingly. But so that those big motorways, those habits that we create in childhood, are still going to be there, but you can always build new roads, and that takes time. So they'll start off as footpaths, and then they'll gradually become little roads that cars can go along, and eventually you can create motorways, freeways, as they say in America. So you can create a new parallel set of stronger roads. So if you've got any bad habit, whatever that habit is, an addiction, a set of of negative behaviors or thought patterns, you can create new thought patterns. The old patterns will always be there. They will always be there. So you always have to be mindful and checking in with yourself, but you can create these new roads, these new habits that are even more powerful and compelling to you. So that was one thing, Marissa Peer's interview. Another one, tool that's very useful would be Anna Runkle, who goes by the name Crappy Childhood Fairy on YouTube. Her channel is fantastic. And she's got this thing she calls the daily practice, which really is nothing more than writing down your fears and resentments and then meditating for 10 to 20 minutes twice a day. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now. I do that like once a day now, to be honest. And that's just a really good daily sort of hard drive clean. You know, it just gets some of the rubbish out of your brain, and that has made a huge difference to my stress tolerance, which is great. And then, you know, there are other basic things like just friendships and good connections and whatever. And I've been doing Tai Chi for 27 years now. So Tai Chi has always been helpful. But in terms of those simple things, talking kindly to yourself, doing some daily practice of writing down fears and resentments, and a bit of simple meditation. And I've put a link to Anna Runkle's daily practice in the description below as well, because it's a really good, simple template. And I think that's enough for now, because I don't want this video to be too long. So I'll just move on to mentioning some plants. Now, there are lots of plant allies that I've used, although I don't really like saying used, because in my animist worldview, the plants have a consciousness of their own and we're interacting with them, in fact, which is not so crazy, even if you think about it from a biochemical point of view, because plants are literally the world's best chemists. They produce many compounds which interact with our physiology and our neurology and influences and whatnot. So, but the plants, I'm just going to mention a couple, because obviously I'm a herbalist. I've interacted with many plants and I continue to do so, and there are loads of medicinal plants that I find helpful. And people tend to default to the big guns, like the famous psychedelics like ayahuasca and peyote and mushrooms and all of that. And yeah, great, okay, that's fine. These are like the Tony Robbins of the plant world, you know, the ones that create huge change. But there are other great powers in plants, and some of them are much quieter. They're a bit less grandiose, but they can have just as much impact. So the first one was ginseng, and I've got here the book. This is one of the books that got me into herbal medicine. It's coming up to 30 years old now. Wow. Yeah, 1996 this was published. This is the Book of Ginseng by Stephen Fulder. And in fact, ginseng was the first herb that I used. And that plant was instrumental in helping me get out of the habit of weekend stimulant use, shall we say, for the purposes of YouTube, in my late teens and early 20s. Because what I found when I took it was that should I have gone out on a night out and utilized some pharmaceuticals, let's say, the next day I would find, if I also took ginseng, that I would feel lots better. And so I became intrigued, and I ended up ingesting ginseng in various forms, and found that it was really practically useful for helping to reduce physical stress and the emotional stress, and to improve. What it really made a difference to was my willpower. It increased my willpower, and it reduced the impacts of stresses. And that is exactly what ginseng does. It's a category of plant called an adaptogen, whose existence is sometimes disputed by conventional medicine, which really makes me laugh, because there is an absolute plethora of evidence that it works. If you go on to PubMed, you will find literally thousands of scientific papers on ginseng have been written by now, varying quality for sure, but the evidence is at this point incontrovertible. And it works in part, it's thought, by sensitizing. There's lots of different compounds in it. The main ones are the ginsenosides. It works in part by sensitizing the hypothalamus, which amongst other things I describe as the brain's or the body's hormone thermostat in the brain. It sort of regulates the levels of various hormones it sort of monitors them and regulates them. And ginsenosides, these compounds in ginseng, seem to sensitize the hypothalamus and thereby enable the whole stress control system, sometimes called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal circuit, more sensitive, so that when you experience a stressor, your body reacts more quickly, but then it's sort of like that the stress spikes much more quickly, and then your body shuts off the system much more quickly, so that you're not running hot longer than you need to, if that makes sense. So ginseng's a fascinating plant. I've included a link to a paper in it below, and I credit that plant, among other things, like the influence of friends and having good conversations with people and other factors, getting into Tai Chi, whatever, but I credit that plant to a large degree with helping shift my life away from recreational pharmaceutical use into the medicinal view of plants, and also by buffering and reducing the negative effects of those pharmaceuticals. It's sort of like it was such a key plant in my life in sort of changing the direction of my life. And ginseng is often used in elderly people for reducing stress, and it has lots of interesting properties. There are some contraindications, as with any medicinal plant. It's not great if you have very high blood pressure. There are some medications with which it's incompatible. In Chinese medicine, they say it's slightly heating. Not massively, but it is slightly heating. So it's not for everyone, but it is a very, very useful plant. I think it's used in something like 50% of Chinese herbal medicine prescriptions. So very, very useful. The second plant ally that I got very involved in, obviously because I wrote a book about it, was chocolate. And this was my favorite book on chocolate. Kind of want to do an ASMR moment for this one. This book is amazing. Can I do the tapping? I don't know. Anyway, it feels like it should be ASMR. This book's beautiful. It's called Chocolate Addict by Jonathan Ott, and it's out of print now. But this book sort of got me really interested in cacao as a medicine. It was produced in the 1980s, and I have, of course, written my own book. This is not my display copy. This is my reference copy of my own book that took me 14 years to write, about cacao. Because I really got interested in it. And what I found with cacao is that this plant over the years, or using cacao has over the years, helped me become a bit more comfortable in my own skin, feel a bit, it's brought a little bit more joy into my life. It's helped me feel a bit more comfortable in my own skin. And I think gradually over time, it's just helped me achieve the things I want to achieve by dialing down the background stress, just by providing a little bit of a comfort blanket. So it's crazy, because it's the basis of cocoa and chocolate, right? I mean, the actual cacao is a bit stronger, but it's still basically the same thing. It's why people like chocolate, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. Why is chocolate so compelling for people? And I think it's in part because the plant has such an understated power to lower stress and to change pleasure responses subtly. I call it antiphobic and hedonic modulating. Antiphobic meaning slightly reducing conditioned fear, and hedonic modulating meaning altering pleasure responses, so that I think over time, the regular interaction with this particular plant ally can, it's sort of like, it's a bad analogy, but it's like loosening a tooth in a gum, but this tooth is a bad tooth. It's like if you've got a sort of some gnarly trauma in there, it can just sort of make it easier, gradually, looser and looser, because it just provides you that a little bit of comfort, a little bit of a feeling of stability. So that was an amazing plant ally. There've been lots of other major sort of lesser plant allies that have been very helpful. I could talk about lemon balm, which has been amazing, Melissa, which is a really good mood stabilizer. I remember when Melissa officinalis, it smells lemony, it's beautiful. Again, I've put a link to a paper in the description on YouTube all about lemon balm. What's great about Melissa is it's extremely innocuous. Its only contraindication, I think, is, I mean, if you're allergic to it, which I've never heard of, but presumably somebody out there will be, And also, if you have a slow thyroid, it may slightly slow the thyroid. So if you have a slow thyroid, I would steer clear of it, or just have it occasionally, perhaps. But it makes a beautiful tasting tea, a really tasting tincture, particularly when it's fresh. Like the fresh herb is amazing. But its effect on mood is subtle but very reliable. It buffers sort of wonky mood states. It just, if you're thinking, I've done this, I've tried this, you're thinking really negatively, you take a little dose of Melissa, so like a teaspoon in a bit of water, and then you wait about half an hour, and then just notice your thoughts. And it's the quality of the thoughts. If you're thinking really dark thoughts, by about an hour later, you aren't anymore. You may not be like happy, you might not be turning cartwheels and bouncing off the walls and stuff, but it changes the quality of the thoughts. And the old, like in Culpeper's Herbal, he talks about Avicenna saying it has the power to remove melancholy from the heart and brain. And of course, in the old humoral medieval medicine, the heart meant the emotional center. Think of heart in terms of Valentine's hearts rather than the physical heart. But interestingly, it does help with palpitations and stress-induced cardiac response stuff. As the heart responds very quickly to stress. So fascinating plant. It's also nootropic. It improves quality of thinking and stuff. But my interactions with that plant have been, it's very reliably good for sort of just smoothing out negative thought patterns, and a good illustration. This is such a metaphorical illustration, but when one of my nephews was very young, there was some Melissa in the garden at my dad's house, and he ran round the corner and skidded on a stone and fell backwards, and there was this massive Melissa bush there, and he just fell into the bush and sprang upright, sort of bounced off the bush, and sort of released this beautiful sort of cloud of lemon smelling air as he did so. And then he just giggled. I was like, wow, if that bush hadn't been there, you'd have just skidded and fallen over and smacked your head, and the whole scenario would have been different. And it just, obviously this is an allegory, but I just thought that is what that plant does. That is what that plant does. You didn't even notice that plant just saved your backside. So, and sort of like bounced up with a giggle rather than kind of like falling back and cracking his head. So yeah, Melissa's an amazing one. And chamomile's another one of my favorite plants. It's so basic that people forget how amazing it is. And again, I've put a link to that below. It reduces anxiety. There's research showing that it's antidepressant now. It's anti-anxiety, it's antidepressant, it's antispasmodic for the bowels, it's anti-inflammatory for the bowels, it's slightly pain relieving. I mean, chamomile's helped me out when I've had really bad back pain. Like strong chamomile tea plus painkillers is good in those circumstances. It adds another layer of pain killing effect. So that's even for musculoskeletal pain. But if any of you out there have IBS, as long as you're not allergic to, sensitive to chamomile, it is in the daisy family, and some slightly more people are sensitive to daisy family plants than to other genuses families. But it's great for IBS in most cases, just because it has that combo of anti-anxiety, anti-spasmodic, anti-inflammatory. I think I'll leave it there. I mean, there's so many other herbs I could go on to talk about, but I guess the point I would make is that many of these plants have been very useful. I did want to mention that the next plant I'm going to be experimenting with, and this is another, I'd say, a great power. I think ginseng was, I think cacao was. This is more explicitly psychoactive, and this is the book I've gotten it recently, is Amanita or fly agaric. So I will report back about that at some point. This is Amanita Dreamer's book on it. She's got a great YouTube channel to check out. I did 1 month of microdosing this summer, which is interesting. Not particularly, all I noticed was that there was maybe a slight increase in motivation. But I'll be very, very interested in this one, because her book and the book of Baba Masha, who is a Russian doctor who's been compiling accounts of people using Amanita, do seem to point to it being quite a useful expediter of trauma processing, put it that way, but in microdoses, so in very, very low doses over a period of time. So we shall see. So ongoing projects. The point about self-sabotage is it's a hydra. Like many heads, you cut one head off, another one goes. But like the hydra, it has one body, and that body is usually some sort of early trauma stuff, and that has often the very common "I am not enough" thing that goes with it. It's something that Marissa Peer points to very often. So it can take a long time to build those B roads, those new habits. There's a book I recommend by Charles Duhigg called Habit, which I haven't mentioned in the description on YouTube, but I'm mentioning it now, where he talks about habit formation. And yeah, anyway, I'll stop rambling. This is long enough. I hope this has been enjoyable. If it has, please subscribe. Please share it with anyone who you think would find it enjoyable. And hopefully some of you will join me next week for the next one. All right. Bye, guys.